So we're going to do a little more concurrenting. And Paul has probably started to make his way downstairs with whoever wanted to go out with the glacier interpreters who are answering 3 different questions at 3 different stages. Stations on glaciers. And then in this room, it's Maia. It was right there, right? So Maia's here from RCAC, and she's going to talk about then and now, 34 years since the Exxon Valdez oil spill, followed by Sarah Schoen, marine food webs. And yeah, so come on up, Maia. Thank you.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Make sure I have my notes. All right, so my name is Maia Draper-Reich. I am the outreach coordinator for the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council, which has existed since shortly after the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. The council, as you'll hear me shorten it today, the council has given a voice to the people who live and work in the region that was impacted by that oil spill. So over the next 30 minutes-ish, I will share with you about the impacts of the spill and the ongoing oil spill prevention and response work done here to protect Prince William Sound and the downstream communities. So you can go, just hit next. It should pop the title up there. Oh, go back one. Go back one. Okay, so out of curiosity, how many of you in the room were around this area during the Exxon Valdez spill? Yeah, I've heard some personal stories today. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and then how many have familiarity with the council, have heard our name? Okay, cool, great. Quite a few of you. So yeah, as stated, the council is a nonprofit group formed after the spill to accomplish the mission listed here on the slide. So citizens promoting the environmentally safe operation of the Alyeska terminal and associated tankers. All day today, we've been learning about how this beautiful region of Alaska is resilient and how the interconnectedness of every element here contributes to that. Crude oil moving through tankers through these waters is an element here too. And so the council exists, as I said, to represent the people and make sure we have a voice and make sure we are ready here to prevent and respond to oil spills as effectively as possible. So I'll be, kind of tracing 34 years since the spill. Let's get into it. Okay, now we can go next slide. Yeah, these are my questions. So what were the impacts of the Exxon Valdez spill? I'll share a bit about that next. And how has the impacted region shown resilience in the years since? So a little bit of orientation to the system that many of you will be familiar with. But this map shows on the red line there, it shows the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, which runs 810 miles from Prudhoe Bay on the north coast of Alaska down to the Valdez Marine Terminal across the Sound in Valdez. And these days, approximately 450,000 barrels of crude oil move through the pipeline system every day. That's down from maybe 2 million barrels per day in the heyday of, say, the late 80s. A barrel of oil is 42 gallons. Next. That crude oil arrives here at the Valdez Marine Terminal over in Port Valdez, where it's stored relatively briefly and then loaded onto tanker ships. And this facility started shipping oil in 1977. And again, I'm kind of tracing the system, and we'll talk about the oil spill, but just for reference, my organization, the council's area of oversight begins here at the terminal. So it begins where the pipeline ends. We pay attention to the Valdez Marine Terminal and the tankers as they transport crude oil through the Sound. So next slide, please. The oil is loaded onto tankers like this. If you've been over there in Eastern Prince William Sound, maybe you've seen some of these ships. These tankers travel out from the Valdez Marine Terminal, which is in the very top corner of the slide there in yellow, and then travel along those tanker lanes those shipping lanes out to the Gulf of Alaska. Next slide. We pay attention to these ships until they leave Prince William Sound. From there, the tankers travel through the Gulf, mostly down to refineries in Washington, California, and Hawaii. There is a refinery here in Alaska as well. And occasionally ships from the Valdez Marine Terminal will travel to East Asia. So that's the system. This is this lifeblood of our state, right? Moving through here. And so that's going to bring us to the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Again, as you may be familiar, as you may have witnessed for yourselves or learned about, the Exxon Valdez oil spill was this major marine oil spill disaster named for the ship that ran aground. Just happens to be named for the town too, or that was nearby, but named for the Exxon Valdez ship. And this spill was a disaster that was in many ways mishandled by industry players at the time, resulting in significant, long-lasting environmental, cultural, and societal impacts. Next slide, please. So a really quick summary of the incident. The vessel departed the Valdez Marine Terminal, again, kind of top right corner of that slide. The ship departed the terminal, traveled through the Valdez Narrows, where at that point the local pilot disembarked, as was standard at the time. And as the ship traveled, there was significant ice coming off of Columbia Glacier. So in that time, this was 1989, Columbia Glacier was much farther forward in its fjord and would very frequently send large amounts of ice out, obstructing those shipping lanes from time to time. So the ship crew called into the Coast Guard and asked permission to turn out of the outbound shipping lane into the inbound shipping lane. And this was normal practice at the time, again, due to ice conditions. As you can see from the line, they ended up traveling on this chart. Basically, they were granted permission, but the crew zigged and didn't zag. They didn't turn back into the lane of travel that was approved when they called in. So they turned, and then as you can see right before they encountered this underwater charted rock, Bly Reef, they attempted to course correct, but at that point it was too late. So the vessel ran aground on Bly Reef there near Bly Island. And this happened just after midnight on March 24th, 1989. So beyond, the crew and others on board being at fault, there were a lot of other factors that resulted in this happening. Things like the radar was not operating well on the ship, and the Coast Guard should have been watching them and calling in, right? There were several levels of complacency at play. Next slide, please. So the ship ran aground, and an estimated 11 million gallons, or 257,000 barrels of North Slope crude spilled into this remote, research-rich environment that we've been learning about. I think it's been interesting today to hear how many organizations and how much work has connections to this event, even 34 years on. This happened less than 30 miles from the town of Valdez and quite close to the community of Tutitlik. And so as you all know, the spill of this toxic crude oil into this region was catastrophic. This area hosts a world-class salmon fishery, among others, distinct marine life, right? People rely on these waters for food, for jobs. This was huge. And the spill was enough of a disaster of itself, but how the response happened really compounded that further. So the response was slow and disorganized. Basically, at the time, contingency plans, or the plans that we follow when an accident happens, those lacked detail and they weren't effectively implemented. And at first, the weather was calm. The weather was relatively calm for about 3 days. And then it's March in Prince William Sound, a winter storm blew in. Next slide, please. And so over the next days and weeks, it's a little hard to tell on the size, but the days are marked there on this graphic. The oil spread southwest along the shoreline. The furthest extent was about 470 miles away from that original spill point. That second bullet point, 1,300 miles of shoreline was impacted. Again, you all are somewhat familiar with the shape of our shoreline. It's very, because of the glacial nature, it's very twisty, turny. 1,300 miles is the equivalent of Seattle to Los Angeles being impacted. About that. And again, same thing in the response, there was sort of these layers of things that went wrong. For example, there was staged equipment nearby. A lot of it was in connexes buried under the winter snowfall and therefore delayed access. There was confusion about who was responsible for what and who was able to act, that kind of thing. So again, many contributing factors to the scale of the spill. And this image here is the reason that my organization represents who we represent these days, giving the people of the entire impacted region a voice. So what we're called the Prince William Sound RCAC, we represent not only communities of Prince William Sound, but also the Outer Kenai Coast, Lower Cook Inlet, and Kodiak. Next slide. So this is super broad brushstrokes here. As there's so much detail and nuance to the aftermath of this event. Again, you can even, I think earlier today, we were hearing even the ripples of how this impacted in a variety of ways. So environmentally, right, fisheries were on hold for years. An example species that was heavily impacted was herring, which we're going to hear talk about in a little bit. That is a species that we would say hasn't fully recovered, certainly that fishery. And then, other animals, right? This killed many animals and birds. You can still find crude oil on certain beaches today, as we heard about from Marianne. There are still these impacted points along the shoreline. This stuff stays in the environment for a long time. And then, society-wise, socially, communities were heavily impacted in a variety of ways. This was a collective trauma, and that connects to the financial piece too. So some people, their livelihood was, taken away from them, and some community members were able to take on cleanup contracts where they were making lots of money. So there were these interesting discrepancies, and of course, there was, sort of social fallout that comes with that sort of thing, that kind of conflict. There was increase in substance use, suicide, things like that affect, that happen when communities are traumatized in these ways. And of course, compensation and litigation went on for years. I'm sure people in this room have stories about that too. Again, I'm rushing over a lot of detail here. And then the industry had to change, right? And so a lot changed. There was an emergency order at the state level that industry had to comply with very quickly. And then amongst other regulatory changes, the solidifying legislation that followed the Exxon Valdez oil spill was a law called the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. Next slide. So this was passed about a year and a half, it was a little less, I guess, August of 1990, year and a half after the event. And this law updated federal requirements nationally around oil spill response and payment and things like that. That took the form of updating the Clean Water Act, increasing federal oversight of marine oil transport generally, requiring drug testing, things like that are written in that law. There also included some specific pieces, some items specific to Prince William Sound. So tankers have to carry specialized towing equipment for this region, and this law also required the phasing in of double-hulled tankers. So the Exxon Valdez ship was one layer of metal between the ocean water and the crude oil, Now, all of the ships that travel through Prince William Sound have one layer of space. They actually carry ballast water when they're running, if they're empty of oil. When they're coming up through the Gulf, they'll carry ballast water for balance. And then there's the second layer that holds the oil. So that's a literal extra layer of protection that exists now. And many other layers of protection have since been added. Yes, thank you. So also written into the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 was the formation of 2 regional citizens advisory councils. So that's Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council, and the other one is Cook Inlet RCAC. Cook Inlet Regional Citizens Advisory Council looks at all of the oil production that happens in Cook Inlet and the movement there. So we have different geographic areas, but similar operations and similar purpose. Citizens were organizing even right before the Exxon Valdez spill, and then things moved pretty quickly when that event happened to give citizens a voice. It was a piece in the response where local knowledge was not engaged, local community members were maybe not included in decision making as best they could be. In our guiding documents, so in the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 and other documents that we follow, these are the responsibilities listed here on the slide of the 2 RCACs. So we provide advice and recommendations. We monitor environmental impacts. We review oil spill prevention and contingency plans. Obviously, prevention is a huge part of what we do. We don't want any oil spilling into the water. And provide advice and recommendations specific for Prince William Sound. We focus again on the terminal in Valdez and the tankers here. And we are assured independence, funding, and access to information. So we're a citizens oversight group, but we have the same access as a federal or state regulating agency. And we're guaranteed the ability to do independent research and monitoring. So yeah, I'll get into that a little bit more. These councils are unique. I don't know of any other federally mandated advisory councils like this. So it's a unique format. Basically, we look at industry and regulators and sort of like to think of ourselves as the third leg of the stool, keeping the citizens' voice heard. So this is who Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council represents. You could cross-reference this list with that image of where the oil spread. We represent the communities of that region as well as other key stakeholders. And our board is made up of 1 representative from each of these entities, with the exception of the city of Valdez has 2 representatives. If you could just hit next on there. We also have invited to our board meetings our ex officio members. So that would be non-voting members. These are mostly federal and state agencies, as well as the Oil Spill Recovery Institute. And our structure also includes 5 technical committees made up of volunteers that are either local citizens or people with other specific expertise that advise our board members, advise those community representatives on what projects we should do and what work we should be paying attention to. So next, yes. So since this spill, a lot has been done. Industry and regulators have implemented major changes in the oil transport system over the last 34 years. And the council has been through a lot of that, paying attention to all of that, achieving a lot of work and accomplishing research. Most of our projects are done in collaboration with either industry, Alaska pipeline service companies, shipping companies, regulating agencies, and other partners. Basically, there's always room to improve. There's been huge improvements. For example, in this picture that you're seeing, there's a tanker being escorted by 2 tugboat vessels. That is true. Now the tugboats, the pilots stay on board and the tugboats travel with the vessel all the way out to Hitchenbrook entrance. So we call that the double escort. And they are actually traveling tethered. One that tug behind will be tethered to the tanker through the Valdez Narrows, and then both will continue on. That wasn't happening before. So again, all these layers of protection of if something were to happen, being ready to respond. There's always room to, as I said, to fight complacency within industry and regulation. And the council's work areas are listed here that our technical committees advise on and our board makes decisions around. And there's a lot of past and ongoing projects that we keep ourselves busy with. But I wanted to highlight just 3 examples for you. I have plenty of reading material at the back if you're curious about other stuff that we are up to. So this was a recent project kind of on the maritime side of things, looking at devices, line throwing devices. And let me explain what that is. So if a tanker vessel, so one of these huge oil tankers, becomes disabled, so let's say loses power or loses steering and needs assistance, basically needs a tugboat to it attached to it and help it maneuver so that it doesn't get washed up onto rocks or something else. The initial step there to connect those 2 boats, in certain conditions, certainly in stormy conditions, you can't just drive right up and side tie and it's all fine, right? There's safety concerns there. So they use different things to basically either project a really thin line, initial connector line, or they can also float through the water. There's some devices that we looked at for that. But this is a piece where there's sort of a gap on what's the best available technology. So once you make that connection, then you pass, bigger and bigger lines back and forth until you can get the full towing gear connected and then maneuver as you need. But that first step of how do you throw kind of the thinnest line, the dental floss equivalent line, how do you throw that across and make that initial connection, say in bad weather? So the council contracted a group, an engineering group, to do a study. This is pictures of that. These are testing some pneumatic devices, which, basically you can find kind of firearm type devices or these other launchers, as well as they did test a floating, how to float a line and have the tugboat pick it up. Looking at best available technology, it was found that a couple of these pneumatic devices were kind of the best and easiest to practice with. Because that's key too, right? Having crews train and feel comfortable with this equipment for when an emergency occurs. Okay, next slide. We have a long-term environmental monitoring project. So again, at the time of this spill in 1989, there was a lack of baseline data about the sound, kind of ecological data. So it was a bit hard to quantify the impacts of that event. And so now we have 30 plus years of data in this long-term monitoring study that is collected in some form each year. And then there's years where we go to more sites. And again, just establishing information now, both learning about the changes and the impacts since, but also what's the current environmental baseline. Next. I guess how many of you in this room maybe know someone who's involved with the SERVS fishing vessel program? Yeah, a lot of you. So the SERVS acronym stands for Ship Escort Response Vessel System, and that's the overall system that has the tugboats. It also has purpose-built barges, as pictured in the bottom right there, to respond if there was an oil spill. And this system relies on contracted fishing vessels in 6 communities throughout the region. So here in Whittier, Valdez, Cordova, Homer, Seward, and Kodiak all have fleets of local vessels, mostly fishing vessels, but perhaps other small vessels as well. And they train every year to work with the purpose-built vessels, those big tugs and barges, to practice picking up oil in their community. So again, there was this lack of engagement of the local, at least initially, lack of engagement of that local knowledge and local expertise. And now it's these folks who, this is their backyard, this is their office. They're involved in cleanup, and the system doesn't function without them. They're truly a backbone here. So you can see them practicing in these pictures. The orange stuff is boom. I actually have an example in the back corner of that if you want to go look at it in a moment, which is what you'd tow at the surface of the water. Oil floats, right? So you tow that to collect the oil together. And then you can see these crane arms, both on the small scale coming off the small fishing vessel and on the large scale coming off the big barge. Those would hold skimmers, which are the devices that dip in, pick up oil, pick up more oil than water. And then that's loaded into either a small barge, like you see side tied to that seiner there, or the large barge itself, depending on if you're in more open water or more near shore. And the council monitors these trainings. So these trainings for the fishing vessel, the local fishing vessels, as well as any other drills and practices going on. The council evaluates and gives feedback and is involved in those practices and those trainings. And a piece of my job as the outreach coordinator, I get to in one of the communities each year, we host a boat tour where we for free get the public, get the community out to observe this training a little more up close. You know, maybe this is something you've seen out in the bay each winter or spring and not really known what it was. And so we get school kids and families and local leaders out to learn more about their local community's involvement. We do have, as the voice of the citizens, we have public communication and outreach as a part of what we do. So I would say that this program, the fishing vessel program, is a key way that local people are, and that local knowledge and expertise that you all who live here have, is engaged in the response system for oil spills. And then the council is the other main way that your voices are heard on issues of oil spill prevention and response. And I would just add, I meant to say earlier on our board meeting slide, our board meetings, our committee meetings are open to the public and all held via Zoom or hybrid on Zoom and in person. So if you'd ever like to attend, please stay tuned on our website, and or you can reach out to me. I'll have my email at the end here. I'm happy to get you tuned in to learn more about what we do. Next slide. Okay, so relatively quick, I only have 30 minutes. This has been a relatively quick overview of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and its impacts and the changes that have happened since. So I hope you feel like you've gotten a sense of the story of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and how it shaped the environment, the people, and the industry here. Next slide there, Charla. Yeah, perfect. So this work continues. I think, again, we've heard kind of the ripples of the impacts through the different sessions today. And for us at the council, the Valdez Marine Terminal, again, came online in 1977. So has aging infrastructure that needs attention. The ships continue to move crude oil through the waters, and industry regulating agencies and the council continue to focus on refining the prevention measures and the response tactics to build a resilient system that hopefully never lets crude oil touch the water again, and if it does, can respond effectively. Because as resilient as this environment is, many species we've seen bounce back once oil is spilled. At best, if the weather's good and the wind doesn't come up, at best you can clean up 30 to 40%. So to build a resilient industry and community, it's really key to give local people a voice and a role. And complacency is still something we talk about all the time in both industry and in regulation. So it's something that the council will continue to provide a voice for citizens for this beautiful environment and to help ensure the safety and protection of communities, economies, and our resources here. And thank you. Yeah, I invite you to learn more about the spill and about Prince William Sound RCAC on our website. For those of you in the room, I do have plenty of stuff if you want to grab to read later. We love to document everything. So the resources tab on our website has tons of reports on more specific things if you really want to get in the weeds. And I have, I think, a couple more copies of the spill book back there. In addition to that book with firsthand stories, there's a really wonderful archive on UAF's website, Project Jukebox. If you just Google Project Jukebox, Exxon Valdez, there's a really wonderful set of videos and audio recordings of that oral history, people's firsthand experiences of this event and its impacts. My email is listed here. If you have any follow-ups later, thank you so much for joining me for this talk today. And I'm happy to answer any questions as best you can, or as best I can. Yeah. My understanding is that we have world-class response operations here. We have really, it's pretty unique the way that the fishing vessels are engaged. I don't know of another system around the world where the local vessels where that's not their primary purpose are engaged. So yeah, I would say world-class, which is, yeah, not how it was before. So pretty interesting.